I stood in the command chapel when the custodian arrived, and I knew immediately that my life as I understood it was over. The golden giant filled the doorway completely, his armor catching the light of the prayer candles in ways that hurt to look at directly. He said nothing, simply extended one massive gauntleted hand holding a scroll of parchment that seemed impossibly small in his grip. When I took it, the weight was wrong, heavier than paper should be, as if the words written on it carried actual mass. The seal was the Emperor's own. I had seen it before, stamped on orders that sent millions to their deaths, pressed into treaties that bound entire star systems to Imperial service. But I had never seen it on anything addressed to me personally. Captain Marcus Thane, 45th Cadian Shock Regiment, veteran of 73 campaigns across 23 years of service to the Golden Throne. You are summoned to the Eternity Gate for personal audience with the Master of Mankind. Report within 24 standard hours. There is no option to decline. The custodian waited while I read. His face was hidden behind a helmet fashioned to look like an idealized human warrior, all strong lines and noble features rendered in gold. But I could feel his eyes on me through the metal, watching for my reaction. I had faced down orc war bosses, stared across battle lines at Chaos Space Marines, watched Tyrannid swarms blacken entire horizons. None of it had prepared me for the simple terror of being noticed by the Emperor himself. My hands shook as I rolled the parchment back up. The chapel suddenly felt very small. The icons of the Emperor that lined the walls, images I had prayed to every morning for 2 decades, seemed to watch me with something that might have been pity. The incense that always burned here, corpse starch and sacred oils mixed together, filled my lungs and made it hard to breathe. 24 hours. I had 24 hours to report to the most sacred location in the entire galaxy, to stand before the God Emperor of mankind and answer for something I had done. The parchment did not say what. It did not need to. There was only one decision I had made recently that would draw his attention. Only one choice that mattered on a scale large enough for a being who watched over 1,000,000 worlds. The Forge world, the STC fragment, the 50,000 men I had left to die. The custodian turned and walked away without a word. His footsteps were completely silent despite the weight of his armor. I watched him go, a giant in gold disappearing into the gray corridors of the command station like a vision fading back into dreams. For a long moment I stood there with the parchment in my hand, feeling its impossible weight, trying to understand what was about to happen to me. I had served the Emperor my entire adult life, joined the Guard at 16, made officer by 23, earned my captaincy through 47 battles where I had watched good men die following my orders. Every decision had been for the Imperium, every sacrifice had served a purpose. I told myself that every night when I closed my eyes and saw the faces of the dead, every death had meaning because it advanced the Emperor's will. But 50,000 men, that was different. That was not a tactical necessity or an unfortunate loss during a complicated battle. That was a choice. I had been given 2 objectives and insufficient resources to achieve both. Save the Guard regiments pinned down in the southern sectors or secure the Forge world before the orcs could destroy the STC fragment held in its deepest vaults. The mathematics had been simple. 50,000 lives against a piece of technology that could arm millions. 50,000 men against the future of an entire sector. I had chosen the Forge world. I had taken my armor companies north and left those men to fight without support. They had died to the last soldier while my tanks rolled through the orc lines and secured the STC before it could be lost forever. The Mechanicus had been grateful. High Command had approved my decision. I had received a commendation for tactical excellence and strategic thinking. But late at night, I still heard them calling for support that never came. I still saw the casualty reports scrolling across my data slate, names and numbers. 50,000 reasons to doubt every prayer I had ever spoken. And now the Emperor wanted to see me, personally, in the flesh or what remained of his flesh after 10,000 years bound to the Golden Throne. I left the chapel and walked through the command station in a daze. Soldiers saluted as I passed, but I barely saw them. The gray metal corridors stretched ahead like the passages of a tomb. Everything looked different now, smaller and less important. The station that had been my home for 3 years suddenly felt like a waiting room, a temporary place I had occupied while my real fate was being decided elsewhere. My quarters were sparse, a cot, a desk, a footlocker containing everything I owned that mattered. On the desk sat 3 things: a data slate with my current orders, a picture of my mother taken 40 years ago before the Tyranids had consumed our homeworld, and a small wooden box containing 73 medals, one for each campaign I had survived. I looked at them and tried to feel pride. I felt nothing but the weight of the parchment in my hand. The journey to Terra took 18 hours through the warp. I spent most of it alone in a transport chapel, kneeling before an icon of the Emperor and trying to pray. The words would not come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the forge world burning, heard the screams of men dying in the southern sectors, felt the weight of command crushing down on me like a physical thing. The other passengers gave me space. They could see the parchment I carried, sealed with the Emperor's mark, and they understood what it meant. Officers and soldiers who would normally have sought conversation or shared stories stayed away. I was already separate from them, already marked for something beyond their understanding. There were 4 others carrying similar parchments. I noticed them during the mandatory muster on the 2nd day of transit. A sister of battle with burn scars covering half her face. An inquisitor whose eyes held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much. A rogue trader wearing clothes that cost more than my entire career salary. An old commissar whose hands shook when he held his parchment, though his back remained perfectly straight. We did not speak to each other at first. We orbited each other in the transport's common areas like moons around different planets, each lost in our own dread. But eventually the sister approached me. Her name was Celestine, though she said it quietly, as if the name carried weight she no longer wanted. She had purged an entire hive sector, 3 billion souls declared irredeemable and burned to ash by her order. A cult had taken root in the population, she explained, something subtle and patient that had spread through families over generations. By the time it was discovered, removing it would have required checking every citizen individually. That would have taken decades. The cult would have spread to other sectors by then, so she had made the choice. Ordered the flames. Watched 3 billion people die so that 30 billion others might live. High Command had approved her decision. The ecclesiarchy had declared her actions righteous, but the Emperor wanted to see her anyway. The Inquisitor's story was similar in its terrible mathematics. He had declared an entire Space Marine chapter excommunicate after discovering corruption in their ranks. Not the whole chapter, he admitted. Perhaps 200 Marines out of 1,000. But they were mixed throughout the chapter structure. Removing them surgically would have taken years and risked the corruption spreading. So he had condemned them all, ordered the Ordo Malleus to destroy warriors who had served the Emperor for centuries. Some of them had been heroes with battlefield honors stretching back 400 years. He had killed them anyway. The rogue trader had made deals with the Tau. Traded Imperial technology for assistance evacuating human colonies in the path of a Tyranid splinter fleet. She had saved 40 million lives. She had also armed a Xenos empire and given them insights into Imperial ship design. The lives saved were real and immediate. The potential harm from those deals might not manifest for decades. But it was still harm. Still betrayal of humanity's birthright. The commissar would not share his story. He just stared at his parchment and shook. We reached Terra on schedule. The planet appeared in the viewport like a jewel, if jewels could be made of gray metal and desperate hope. The entire surface was covered in structures built over ruins of civilizations so old their names had been forgotten. Hive cities rose like mountains. Industrial zones stretched across continents. And at the heart of it all, visible even from orbit, the imperial palace sprawled across what had once been called Asia. It glowed with its own light, power, and faith made visible. The shuttle took us down through atmospheric lanes restricted to the highest levels of imperial service. We passed defense platforms that could destroy fleets, flew between towers so tall their tops disappeared into the clouds, descended through layers of smog and incense smoke that turned the air brown and thick. The deeper we went, the more oppressive everything became. This was not just a city. It was the physical manifestation of 10,000 years of accumulated faith and fear and desperate hope. Every prayer ever spoken seemed to hang in the air, waiting for an answer that never came. We landed at a port that served only the palace. Custodians waited for us on the landing pad, 5 golden giants standing perfectly still in the poisoned rain that fell constantly on Terra's surface. They did not introduce themselves. They simply gestured for us to follow and began walking toward an entrance carved into the palace's outer wall. The entrance was 50 meters high. We were insects walking into the mouth of something vast and hungry. Inside the palace was everything I had imagined and nothing I could have prepared for. The corridors were wide enough to march entire regiments through. The ceilings disappeared into shadow above. Every surface was carved with images of the emperor's victories, his conquests, his endless wars. But the carvings were old, worn smooth in places by 10,000 years of pilgrims touching them. The paint had faded. The gold leaf had tarnished. The palace was a tomb dressed as a temple. We walked for hours, through chambers filled with servo skulls recording everything, past libraries where tech priests copied ancient texts onto human skin, by armories holding weapons from the Great Crusade. The custodians never spoke, never slowed, just led us deeper into the palace, closer to whatever judgment awaited us in the depths. The weight of the parchment in my hand grew heavier with every step. The Eternity Gate stood before us like a wall at the end of the world. I had seen pictures in the imperial texts, images approved for public viewing that showed a simple doorway decorated with eagles and skulls. Those images were lies. The gate was 30 meters tall and carved from a single piece of gold so pure it seemed to glow from within. Scenes from the Emperor's life covered every centimeter. Battles against Xeno's horrors, the unification of Terra, the Great Crusade spreading across the stars. But the carvings moved. I watched the figures shift and change as I stared, as if the metal itself was alive and remembering. 2 custodians stood guard on either side. They had been standing there when the palace was built. They would stand there when I was dust. Their presence was absolute. They did not acknowledge us. They did not need to. We were already beneath their notice, already judged by something far greater than ourselves. One of our escort custodians stepped forward and placed his hand against the gate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt it. A pressure in my chest like the air before a storm. The temperature dropped so quickly I could see my breath. The gate began to open, not swinging on hinges, but sliding apart as if the metal was liquid. The sound it made was wrong, too low to hear properly, but felt in the bones. Like the earth groaning under weight it could no longer bear. Beyond the gate lay darkness, not the absence of light, but something deeper. A darkness that pressed against my eyes and made them water. The sister beside me whispered a prayer. The Inquisitor put his hand on his sidearm, even though weapons would mean nothing in this place. The rogue trader took a step back before catching herself. The commissar simply stared ahead with eyes that had already seen his own death. The custodian gestured for us to enter. No words, no explanation. We walked into the darkness and the gate closed behind us with a sound like a coffin lid sealing. The darkness lasted 3 steps. Then there was light again, but not the kind that brings comfort. Soft and golden and cold. It came from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows because there was nothing left that could cast them. We stood in a corridor that stretched ahead for what looked like a kilometer. The walls were black marble veined with gold. The ceiling was too high to see clearly. And the air was thick with something that made breathing difficult. Not poison. Something else, the weight of too many prayers. The accumulated grief of 10,000 years of worship. We walked. Our footsteps echoed strangely, arriving at our ears a moment too late, as if sound itself was struggling to exist here. The corridor seemed to stretch as we moved. Distances became meaningless. We might have walked for minutes or hours. Time felt different this deep in the palace, slower and heavier and more patient. The corridor ended at another chamber. This one was smaller, perhaps 50 meters across, with a domed ceiling painted with scenes of ancient Terra before the wars had scoured it clean. Green lands and blue oceans that no longer existed. Children playing under a yellow sun that was now hidden behind eternal smog. A dream of what humanity had lost. In the center of the chamber stood 5 more custodians. Between them waited something that made my heart stop. A chair, simple and plain, made of dark wood that looked ancient beyond measure. There was no decoration, no symbols. Just a chair that radiated wrongness like heat from a fire. One of the custodians spoke. His voice was beautiful and terrible, like music played on instruments made from bones. Each of you will sit. Each of you will face what you have done. Some of you will continue to the throne room, some of you will not. There is no shame in failing this test. There is only truth. The sister went first. She walked to the chair with her head high, her burn scars catching the golden light. When she sat, nothing visible happened. But her face changed. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened in a silent scream. Her hands gripped the armrests so tightly I heard the wood crack. She sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes. When she stood, tears ran down her face, cutting clean lines through the ash and grime of travel. The custodian gestured to a door I had not noticed before. She walked through it without looking back. The Inquisitor was next. He approached the chair like a man walking to his execution. When he sat, his entire body went rigid. His augment eye, the one that could see through walls and detect lies, began to spark and smoke. Blood ran from his nose. His fingers dug into the wood hard enough to leave marks. When he stood, he looked 20 years older. The custodian gestured. Another door. He walked through. The rogue trader lasted 30 seconds before she screamed. The sound echoed through the chamber like breaking glass. When she stood, her expensive clothes were soaked with sweat. Her hands shook so badly she could barely walk. But she walked. Through the door. Gone. The commissar sat and did not move at all. His face remained perfectly blank. His hands stayed relaxed on the armrests. But when he stood, I saw that he had bitten through his lower lip. Blood stained his teeth. He walked through the door like a man in a dream. Then it was my turn. The chair waited. The custodians watched. I walked forward because there was no other choice. The wood was warm when I sat, body temperature, as if someone had just been there. The armrests fit my hands perfectly. I looked up at the painted ceiling, at the lost Terra spinning in eternal sunlight, and then the world disappeared. I was standing on a battlefield, not a memory, not a vision. Real in every way that mattered. The ground under my boots was mud mixed with blood. The air stank of burning promethium and cooked meat. Smoke rolled across broken terrain in thick waves. And everywhere were bodies. Guard, uniforms, Cadian colors. Men I had commanded, men I had abandoned. They were not dead, not yet. Some crawled through the mud, dragging legs that no longer worked. Some screamed for medics who would never come. Some simply sat and stared at wounds they knew were fatal. And they all looked at me. Thousands of eyes turning to watch as I walked through them like a ghost. Captain. The voice came from a man missing half his face. His name was Torin. I remembered him. Good soldier. Followed orders, never complained. Why did you leave us, Captain? We called for support. We called for hours. You never came. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I tried to look away, but my eyes would not move. I was forced to see every detail, every wound, every moment of suffering. The chair was not showing me what happened. It was making me experience what they experienced, the fear, the pain, the growing understanding that help was not coming, that they had been abandoned. The scene changed. I stood in the Forge World's vault. The STC fragment sat on a pedestal in front of me, glowing with soft blue light. It was beautiful, ancient, priceless. Around me, tech priests chanted prayers of gratitude. Behind me, my tanks idled in victory. The orcs had been driven back. The technology was saved. Billions would benefit from what this device could produce: weapons, armor, tools that would serve the Imperium for centuries. But the walls of the vault were transparent now. I could see through them, see the southern sectors, see the guard regiments dying while I stood here in triumph. I watched them fall. Watched the orcs overrun their positions, watched 50,000 men die so that I could hold this piece of ancient metal. The scene changed again. I stood in a room I had never seen before. It was small and plain. A desk, a cot, a single window looking out at stars. An old man sat at the desk. He wore simple robes and his hands shook as he wrote in a journal. His face was weathered like old leather. His eyes were the saddest thing I had ever seen. I knew him somehow. Knew him in the way you know your own reflection. He was me. 30 years older, still alive, still serving, but changed in ways that went deeper than age. The old man looked up and saw me. He did not seem surprised. He set down his pen and spoke in a voice rough from too many years of giving orders. You want to know if you made the right choice. You want someone to tell you the 50,000 dead were necessary, that their sacrifice meant something. I nodded because I still could not speak. The old man stood and walked to the window. He stared out at the stars for a long time before continuing. I have made 47 decisions like that one. Chosen the many over the few. Sacrificed the certain for the possible. Every time the mathematics supported the choice. Every time command approved. Every time I told myself it was necessary. He turned to look at me and his eyes held knowledge I did not want. The STC fragment you saved produced weapons. That armed 3 crusades. Those crusades reclaimed 18 worlds and saved approximately 40 billion lives over the next 20 years. The mathematics were correct. Your choice was strategically sound. Relief flooded through me. I had been right. The deaths had meaning. The sacrifice had been worth it. But the old man was not finished. In year 23 after your decision, one of those crusades will encounter a chaos warband. The warband will capture several of the STC weapons. They will study them, learn from them. Use that knowledge to corrupt other STC fragments in other Forge worlds. The corruption will spread slowly at first, then faster. In 50 years, 7 Forge worlds will fall to demon engines built using corrupted STC technology. Those Forge worlds will require exterminatus. The death toll will be 90 billion souls. The room felt very cold, but that is not certain, I said. That might not happen. The old man smiled, and it was the saddest expression I had ever seen. Nothing is certain. That is the hell of command. You make choices based on incomplete information. You sacrifice real lives for possible futures. You tell yourself the mathematics supports your decision and you are correct. But mathematics cannot account for every variable, cannot predict every consequence. You saved 40 billion, you might damn 90 billion. Both outcomes exist in probability. Both are real until time proves one or the other. Then how do I know? I asked. How do I know if I am making the right choice? You don't, the old man said. You never know. You make the best decision you can with the information available and you live with the consequences. You carry the weight of the dead and you keep going because someone has to make these choices and running from them does not make them go away. The scene changed one final time. I stood in a vast space that my mind struggled to understand. It was too large, the walls were too far away, the ceiling too high, and in the center of it all, rising like a mountain of gold and pain and ancient machinery, was the golden throne. I could not see it clearly. My eyes would not focus properly. It hurt to look at directly, like staring at the sun. But I could sense it, could feel its presence the way you feel eyes watching you in the dark. Cables thick as buildings snaked away from its base and disappeared into the floor. Machinery I could not begin to understand hummed with power that made my teeth ache. And connected to it all, bound to the throne by 10,000 years of duty and sacrifice and unbearable necessity, was something that had once been a man. I could not see him, could not let myself see him. If I looked directly at what sat on that throne, I knew my mind would break. But I could feel his attention turn toward me, could feel his consciousness brush against mine like the wing of some vast bird passing overhead. And in that moment of contact, I understood. He had made this choice, not once but millions of times. Every day for 10,000 years he had decided who would live and who would die, had weighed billions of souls against the survival of the species, had sacrificed worlds to save sectors, had condemned the innocent to preserve the guilty when the mathematics demanded it. Every choice had been impossible, every decision had carried unbearable weight, and he had made them anyway because the alternative was extinction. He was not judging me for making the wrong choice, he was judging me for something far more important. Could I bear the weight of being right? Could I carry the guilt of 50,000 deaths and still function, still command, still make more choices just as terrible when they became necessary? Some people broke under that weight, became monsters who stopped caring about the cost, or became cowards who refused to choose at all. Both were useless, both were dangerous. The Emperor needed people who could make impossible choices and remain human enough to feel the horror of what they had done. Needed commanders who would sacrifice when necessary but never become comfortable with sacrifice. Needed souls strong enough to carry guilt without being crushed by it. The vision faded. I was back in the chair, the chamber with the painted ceiling, the watching custodians. My face was wet. I had been crying without knowing it. My hands ached from gripping the armrests. My heart hammered in my chest like it was trying to escape. One of the custodians stepped forward. He was even larger up close, a giant in gold that radiated power like heat from a forge. When he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way I had not expected. You have been measured. You are found sufficient. You will continue to the throne room. What you face there will determine the rest of your existence. There is no shame in whatever comes next. He gestured to a door that had not been there before. It was massive, 20 meters high, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Symbols covered its surface, words in languages I did not recognize. As I watched, the symbols began to glow with a faint golden light. I stood on legs that barely supported my weight. Walked toward the door because that was the only direction left. Behind me, I heard the commissar being led to the chair, heard him sit, heard the sudden sharp intake of breath as the judgment began. The door opened silently. Beyond it lay a corridor that led down. The walls were no longer marble, they were older, rougher, carved from living rock that remembered when this place had been a mountain before it became a palace. The air smelled of incense and ozone and something else, something organic and wrong. The smell of flesh kept alive past its natural time. I walked forward. Each step took me deeper, closer to the heart of the Imperium, closer to the thing that had once been a man and was now something else entirely. The golden light grew brighter as I descended, but it brought no warmth. Only the cold certainty that I was walking toward judgment, and there would be no mercy, no forgiveness, no escape from whatever truth waited in the depths. The corridor ended at a final door. This one was undecorated, simple, made of gold so ancient it had tarnished black in places. I stood before it and felt the weight of 10,000 years pressing down, like the ocean pressing down on something sinking into its depths. Beyond this door was the Emperor. Beyond this door was the judgment that would determine everything. I reached out and pushed. The door opened, and I stepped through into the presence of a dying god. The throne room was not what I expected. I had imagined gold and grandeur, angels and light, the majesty befitting the master of mankind. What I found instead was a tomb. The chamber stretched away in all directions, further than I could see. The ceiling disappeared into shadows that felt alive and watching. The walls were lined with machinery so old that rust had become part of their design. Cables the size of transit tunnels snaked across the floor, pulsing with power that made the air taste of copper and lightning. And the smell was death dressed up as life, rotting meat preserved by machines. Flesh that should have turned to dust 100 centuries ago but was held together by technology and faith and sheer stubborn will. The golden throne sat in the center of it all. It was massive, 20 meters tall, maybe more. Gold plating covered most of its surface, but I could see the machinery underneath where the plating had worn away or been removed for repairs that never quite finished. Tubes and wires ran from the throne into the floor and walls and ceiling. Some carried fluids that glowed with their own light. Others pulsed with electrical current strong enough to power hive cities. And some, I realized with growing horror, were filled with something red and thick that moved with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Servitors moved between the machinery, tending to systems I could not begin to understand. But these were not normal servitors. They were ancient. Some had bodies that looked more like skeletons wrapped in parchment. Others were so heavily augmented that only their eyes remained human. They worked in complete silence, adjusting dials and checking readouts on instruments that predated the Imperium itself. None of them looked at me. None of them acknowledged my presence at all. They had work to do that was more important than any living person. Tech priests knelt in circles around the throne, their mechanical voices chanting prayers that had been spoken every hour of every day for 10,000 years. The sound was hypnotic and terrible. Not words anymore, but pure ritual, pure faith made audible. They swayed as they chanted, their augmented bodies moving in perfect synchronization like parts of a single machine. And on the throne, barely visible through the tangle of tubes and wires and machinery, sat what remained of the Emperor. I could not look at him directly. Every time I tried, my eyes slid away as if my brain was protecting me from something it knew would break me. But I caught glimpses, fragments, a hand so thin the bones showed through skin like old leather, a face that might have been beautiful once but was now just a skull covered in flesh pulled too tight, eyes that were open but did not blink, staring at something beyond the physical world. He was breathing. I could see his chest rise and fall, but each breath looked like it took tremendous effort. Like every moment of continued existence was an act of will that would have crushed a normal person instantly. He was dying, had been dying for 10,000 years, was kept alive by the throne and the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls and his own refusal to surrender. He was the most powerful being in the galaxy, and he was trapped in a body that was little more than a corpse. The contradiction of it made my head hurt. I wanted to look away, wanted to run, but I could not move. My legs had stopped obeying me. My body knew that I was in the presence of something so far beyond human that every instinct screamed at me to prostrate myself or flee or simply cease to exist. I stood frozen between terror and awe, unable to do anything but witness. Then he noticed me. It was not like being seen. It was like being known. His consciousness touched mine, and suddenly I was not standing in the throne room anymore. I was everywhere and nowhere. Time stopped having meaning. Space became fluid. I could see my entire life laid out like a map, every moment existing simultaneously, every choice branching into infinite possibilities. My childhood on a world that no longer existed. Running through streets that were now dust. Playing games whose rules I had forgotten. My mother's face, younger than I remembered, smiling down at me with love that felt distant and immediate at the same time. Joining the guard. The pride I felt putting on the uniform, the fear I hid during my first drop. The first time I killed someone, an orc charging across open ground, and how I threw up afterward while my squad mates pretended not to notice. My first command. 20 men who trusted me to keep them alive. 15 came back. I remembered each of the 5 who died, remembered writing letters to families I would never meet, explaining why their sons and husbands and fathers were never coming home. The promotions, the medals, the growing responsibility. Each new rank meant more people depending on my decisions. Each new campaign meant more chances to get it wrong. I watched myself become harder, watched compassion give way to necessity. Watched the young soldier who threw up after his first kill turn into the commander who could order thousands to their deaths without his hand shaking. And then, the Forge world. I saw it from perspectives I had never considered. Saw the guard regiments in the southern sectors, 50,000 men dug into positions they could not hold. Saw them fighting hour after hour, calling for support that I had promised would come. Saw their ammunition run low. Saw the orcs mass for the final assault. Saw the moment when they realized no help was coming, saw them die, but I also saw the Forge world, saw the STC fragment in its vault, glowing with the accumulated knowledge of humanity's golden age. Saw what would happen if the orcs destroyed it. Saw the weapons that would never be built. Saw the wars that would be lost without those weapons. Saw worlds falling one by one in a cascade of defeat that stretched across centuries. The Emperor showed me 3 timelines, 3 possible futures branching from that single choice, and each one played out in my mind with perfect clarity. In the first timeline, I chose to save the guard regiments. I took my armor companies south. We broke through the orc lines and relieved the trapped soldiers. 43,000 of them survived. We held the southern sectors, but while we fought there, the orcs reached the Forge world. They smashed through its defenses and destroyed the STC fragment in an orgy of violence that left nothing but rubble. Without the technology that fragment would have provided, the sector's defenders struggled to hold their ground. Slowly, over the next 200 years, world after world fell. The orcs gained momentum. The guard could not be supplied properly. Fleet elements were destroyed by attacks they should have repelled. The entire sector collapsed. Final death toll. 40 billion souls. In the second timeline, I chose what I actually chose. I took my companies north. We secured the Forge world and saved the STC fragment. The 50,000 men in the south died to the last soldier. But the technology we recovered changed everything. New weapons flowed out of the Forge world's factories. Armor that could withstand weapons that had previously been fatal. Bolters with improved reliability. Tank parts that did not wear out as quickly. 3 crusades were armed with these weapons. They reclaimed 18 worlds. They saved approximately 40 billion lives over the next 20 years. But in year 23, one of those crusades encountered a chaos warband. The warband captured some of the new weapons, studied them, learned from them, used that knowledge to corrupt other STC fragments in other Forge worlds. The corruption spread like a disease, 7 forge worlds fell to demon engines built from twisted STC technology. Each forge world required exterminatus to stop the spread. Death toll, 90 billion souls. In the third timeline, I tried to do both. I split my forces, sent half south to relieve the guard, took half north to secure the forge world. We were too weak to accomplish either objective properly. The southern force was destroyed. The northern force reached the vault, but arrived minutes too late. The orcs had already begun smashing the STC fragment. We recovered pieces, but they were incomplete, corrupted. The tech priests tried to use them anyway because we had nothing else. The corrupted technology spread chaos through 7 forge worlds immediately instead of decades later. The demon engines it produced were unleashed within months. We lost the entire sector within 5 years. Death toll, 95 billion souls, plus the loss of strategic territory that would cost countless more lives in future wars. The 3 timelines collapsed back into each other. I stood in the throne room again, gasping for air like a drowning man. My mind struggled to process what I had just experienced. All 3 futures were real. All 3 existed as possibilities in the web of cause and effect that governed the galaxy. My choice had been correct by the only measure that mattered. It had resulted in the lowest death toll. 50,000 dead and 90 billion possibly damned was better than 40 billion certainly dead or 95 billion certainly damned. But that understanding brought no comfort. Because the Emperor was not finished. His consciousness pressed against mine again, and I understood something deeper. Something worse. He was not showing me these timelines to justify my choice. He was showing me that there was no right choice. Every option led to horror. Every decision resulted in death counts that made my 50,000 seem insignificant. The mathematics I had relied on, the strategic thinking I had been so proud of, were just tools for choosing between different catastrophes. There was no path that led to everyone living. There was no decision that would let me sleep peacefully. There was only the choice of which nightmare to accept. And the Emperor had been making choices like this for 10,000 years. Every single day, multiple times a day, across 1,000,000 worlds, weighing the lives of billions against each other, deciding which planets to save and which to abandon, which species to ally with and which to destroy, which humans to sacrifice and which to preserve. Every choice impossible, every outcome terrible, every decision leaving scars that accumulated like layers of rock until the weight of them should have crushed any sane mind. I felt his consciousness more fully now and understood that he barely qualified as sane anymore. The man he had once been, the person who had walked and talked and felt emotions in human ways. That person had died thousands of years ago. What remained was something else, something that had been shaped by endless choices into a tool designed for one purpose only: the survival of the human species at any cost. He did not feel guilt anymore. Guilt required a sense of self that had been burned away by millennia of necessary atrocities. He did not feel pride. Pride required the ability to judge his actions as good or bad, and he had moved beyond such simple categories. He did not even feel hope in any way I could recognize. Hope required belief in a better future, and he had seen too many futures to believe any of them were better. They were just different variations of suffering. What he felt instead was duty, pure and absolute and completely inhuman. The determination to protect humanity, not because humans were good or deserving or special, but simply because they were his responsibility. Because 10,000 years ago he had made a choice to guide the species, and that choice still bound him even though everything else about him had changed. He was a parent who had outlived everything that made parenthood meaningful but still protected his children because the alternative was to admit that all the previous sacrifices had been for nothing. And now, he was judging me, not my past actions but my future capacity. Could I bear more weight? Could I make more impossible choices. Could I sacrifice more lives when the mathematics demanded it and still remain functional afterward? Could I become more like him, a tool shaped by necessity into something that could do what was needed regardless of the cost? The question was not asked in words. It did not need to be. I felt it in my bones, felt it in the part of my mind that understood communication beyond language. The Emperor was asking if I was willing to become less human in service of keeping humanity alive. I wanted to say no, wanted to reject the question entirely. I had never asked for this, had never wanted to be the kind of person who could look at 50,000 deaths and call it acceptable losses. But I could feel the weight of his attention pressing down on me like a physical thing. Could feel the accumulated pressure of 10,000 years of choices. And I understood that saying no was not really an option. Because if people like me did not make these choices, they would fall to someone else. And that someone else might not have the mathematics to support their decisions, might not have the strategic training to minimize casualties, might choose based on personal preference or political convenience or simple cowardice. The weight had to be carried by someone. If not me, then who? I thought about the old version of myself I had seen in the vision. The man who had made 47 more decisions like my choice at the Forge World. Who carried the weight of hundreds of thousands of deaths. Who still served because someone had to. He had been sad but not broken. Worn but not useless. Changed but not destroyed. I could become that man. It would cost me pieces of my humanity I was not sure I could afford to lose. It would mean carrying guilt that would never fade. It would mean becoming someone I had never wanted to be. But it would also mean that the deaths I caused would at least serve a purpose, would at least be part of some larger calculation that minimized suffering even if it could not eliminate it. I felt my answer form not in words, but in acceptance, a decision made not because it was right but because it was necessary. I would carry the weight. I would make the impossible choices. I would sacrifice what needed to be sacrificed, including parts of myself. Not because I was good or noble or strong, but because I was capable and someone capable had to do it. The Emperor's consciousness withdrew slightly. I felt something that might have been approval or might have been acknowledgement or might have been nothing more than the recognition that another tool had been shaped for use. He showed me one more vision, brief, final. I saw myself 30 years in the future. Not the sad old man at the desk, but a different version. A Lord Commander standing on the bridge of a flagship watching a planet burn below. A world of 15 billion people consumed by exterminatus because chaos corruption had spread too far to contain. I watched myself give the order. Watched 15 billion souls die in nuclear fire. And watched myself turn away from the viewport and begin planning the next campaign without pausing to mourn. That was what I would become. That was the price of accepting this burden. I would make choices that would damn me in the eyes of anyone who knew the full truth. I would become a monster by any reasonable definition of the word. But I would be a monster in service of keeping humanity alive. The vision faded. I stood in the throne room again. The tech priest still chanted. The servitors still worked. The Emperor still sat on his throne, dying and living and holding reality together through sheer force of will. Nothing had changed except me. I felt different, lighter somehow, as if accepting the weight had made it easier to carry. Or perhaps I had simply become numb to it. I was not sure which possibility was worse. A custodian appeared beside me. I had not heard him approach. He gestured toward a door I had not noticed before. The judgment was complete. Now came the verdict. The custodian led me through corridors I did not remember walking. My mind felt strange, as if parts of it had been rearranged while I stood before the throne. Memories that had been painful now felt distant. Events that had seemed important yesterday now appeared trivial. The 50,000 men I had sacrificed still haunted me, but the guilt sat differently now, heavier and lighter at the same time, more real but less crushing. I understood what had happened. The Emperor had not absolved me of responsibility. He had simply shown me that responsibility was larger and stranger than I had imagined, that carrying it required becoming someone new. We emerged into a chamber I recognized from my journey inward. The room with the painted ceiling showing ancient Terra in all its lost beauty. But now there were others here. The Sister of Battle sat on a bench against the wall, her burn-scarred face peaceful in a way it had not been before. The Inquisitor stood by a window looking out at the palace's inner courtyards, his shoulders straighter than they had been. The rogue trader leaned against a pillar, her expensive clothes still rumpled from sweat, but her eyes steady and calm. The old commissar sat in a corner, his hands no longer shaking. We had all been changed. I could see it in the way they held themselves, in the way they looked at me and nodded with understanding that needed no words. We had all stood before the throne. We had all been measured. We had all been found sufficient for whatever came next. The custodian who had guided me took his place beside 4 others who stood at the room's center. They formed a line, 5 golden giants radiating power and ancient purpose. For a long moment, they simply watched us. Then one of them spoke. His voice was different from the others I had heard, softer, almost sad. You have been judged by the master of mankind. Each of you has stood in his presence and faced the truth of what you have done and what you may yet do. Each of you has been measured against standards that would break most souls. Each of you has been found sufficient, not perfect, not without flaw, but sufficient to bear the weight that will now be placed upon you. He gestured, and servitors emerged from doorways I had not noticed, carrying data slates and sealed parchments. Each servitor approached one of us and offered their burden with mechanical precision. I took the slate and parchment extended to me. The slate was heavy, reinforced, marked with seals that indicated command authority at the highest levels. The parchment was new, but written in a style so formal it might have been composed 10,000 years ago. Captain Marcus Thane. By order of the Master of Mankind, as decreed by the High Lords of Terra, and enacted through the will of the Adeptus Custodes, you are hereby promoted to Lord Commander of Segmentum Tempestus. You will assume command of all Imperial military forces within your designated region. You will coordinate the efforts of the Imperial Guard, Space Marine chapters operating in your territory, and naval assets assigned to your command. You will make decisions regarding troop deployment, resource allocation, and strategic planning for your entire segmentum. You will answer only to the High Lords of Terra and the Emperor himself. The words blurred as I read them. Lord Commander, one of the most powerful military positions in the entire Imperium, commanding not thousands but millions, making choices that would affect not one world but hundreds. The weight of it should have crushed me. Instead, I felt only a strange calm. The Emperor had seen what I would become, had shown me the choices I would make, had judged me capable of bearing this burden. Refusing it would mean admitting he was wrong, admitting that his 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom had failed to measure me correctly. I could not do that, would not do that. Whatever I was about to become, whatever horrors I would cause in service of the greater purpose, they had been deemed necessary by something far wiser than myself. I looked at the others. The sister was reading her own parchment with wide eyes. The Inquisitor held his slate like it might explode. The rogue trader was smiling, though the smile did not reach her eyes. The commissar stared at his orders with the expression of a man who had expected execution and received promotion instead. The custodian continued speaking. Sister Celestine, you will lead a crusade into the Eastern Fringe. 3 Space Marine chapters, 50 Imperial Guard regiments, and supporting naval elements have been assigned to your crusade. The chapters will fight under your banner as they did for saints of old, autonomous in tactics but united in purpose. Your mission is to reclaim worlds lost to Xenos incursion and establish defensive positions that will hold against future attacks. You will have full authority to declare exterminatus where necessary. Inquisitor Valorian, you are elevated to Inquisitor Lord with authority over 7 sectors. You will coordinate the efforts of all Inquisitors operating in your territory. You will identify threats to the Imperium before they manifest. You will have the authority to condemn entire worlds if required. No force below the High Lords themselves may countermand your orders. Trader Captain Xerxia, you are granted writ of trade extremis. You will venture beyond the borders of the Imperium into regions where our laws do not reach. You will make whatever alliances necessary to preserve human colonies in those dark spaces. You will negotiate with Xenos, heretics, and worse if doing so serves the Imperium's interests. You will be judged by results, not methods. Commissar Halen, you are appointed Lord Commissar assigned to the Departamento Munitorum with authority to reform training doctrines across 20 sectors. You will identify inefficiencies in our military structure and correct them. You will have the power to remove officers of any rank who fail to meet standards. You will rebuild our military into something that can survive the wars to come. The custodian paused and looked at each of us in turn. His gaze lingered on me longer than the others. You may be wondering why were you selected for judgment and elevation when millions serve with equal devotion? The answer is simple. You have already demonstrated the willingness to make impossible choices. You have already proven that you can sacrifice when necessary. But more importantly, you have proven that such sacrifices do not come easily to you, that you feel the weight of every death, that you remain human enough to understand the cost even as you pay it. The Emperor does not want commanders who kill without hesitation. He does not want leaders who feel nothing when they condemn worlds. Such people become monsters too dangerous to trust. He wants those who hesitate, who struggle, who carry guilt, but who ultimately do what must be done anyway. He wants people who will remain horrified by their own actions but will not let that horror stop them from acting when action is required. The words struck me like a physical blow. I had thought my guilt was a weakness, had believed that a proper commander should be able to make hard choices without flinching. But the Emperor had judged differently, had seen my struggle and called it strength rather than weakness, had decided that my ability to feel horror at my own decisions made me more valuable, not less. There is no shame in what you have done. The custodian's voice was gentler now, almost kind. There is no shame in what you will do. The mathematics of survival are cruel. They demand sacrifices that no sane being should have to make. But they must be made. Someone must bear the weight of those choices. The Emperor has decided that you 5, among billions, are capable of bearing that weight without breaking. That is not a reward. It is a burden. But it is also an honor beyond anything that can be expressed in words or medals or titles. He gestured to the servitors who waited nearby with additional supplies. You will each be given everything needed to assume your new commands: ships, troops, resources, authority. You will leave Terra within the week and take up your positions. Some of you may never return here. Some of you may die in service before the year ends. All of you will make choices that will haunt you for whatever time remains to you. But know this: every soul you sacrifice, every world you abandon, every horror you permit in service of the greater good, the Emperor knows. He knows your name. He knows your face. He knows the weight you carry. And when your service finally ends, when death claims you as it claims all mortals, he will remember what you endured in his name. That memory is the only reward you will receive. The only comfort available in a galaxy that offers none. Is that enough? The question hung in the air. None of us answered immediately. We looked at each other, 5 people who had been remade by something beyond our understanding. 5 souls who had been judged and found sufficient for tasks that would destroy lesser beings. I thought about refusing. Thought about walking away from the title and the authority and the terrible responsibility it represented. But I knew I would not. Could not. Because the Emperor had seen my future and judged me capable of surviving it. Because someone had to make the impossible choices and I had been measured and found able. Because refusing would mean that all the sacrifices I had already made were meaningless. I spoke first, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. It is enough. The others echoed my words one by one. The sister with fierce determination. The inquisitor with quiet resignation. The rogue trader with dark amusement. The commissar with the tone of a man accepting his own execution. It was not enthusiasm, it was not joy, it was simply acceptance. The understanding that we had been given a burden we could not refuse and would not survive unchanged. The custodian nodded as if he had expected nothing else. Then take your orders. Take your commands. Take your burden, and know that the Emperor protects. Not by preventing suffering, but by ensuring that suffering serves a purpose. Not by sparing us from hard choices, but by giving us the strength to make them. Not by offering comfort, but by offering meaning. That is the only protection any of us can expect in a galaxy at war. We were dismissed. No ceremony. No celebration. Just 5 people walking out of the chamber carrying orders that would define the rest of our lives. The corridors of the palace stretched ahead, leading back to the world beyond the eternity gate, back to reality, back to war. I walked beside the sister for a while. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? We had both been changed in ways that words could not capture, had both accepted burdens that would crush us eventually, had both chosen to serve despite knowing the cost. Finally, as we approached the outer levels of the palace, she broke the silence. Do you think we made the right choice, accepting this? I thought about the 3 timelines the Emperor had shown me, the billions dead in each one, the impossibility of finding a path where everyone lived, the understanding that right and wrong were luxuries we could no longer afford. I do not know if there is such a thing as a right choice anymore, only necessary ones. She nodded slowly. Her burn scars caught the light from the corridor's lumens, making her face look like it was still on fire. That is what frightens me most. Not that I will make wrong choices, but that I will stop being able to tell the difference between necessary and wrong. That I will become so used to sacrifice that it stops feeling like sacrifice at all. Then hold on to that fear. I said the words without thinking, but they felt true. The moment you stop being afraid of what you might become is the moment you have already become it. The Emperor does not want monsters. He wants people who remain horrified by their own actions but do them anyway. Stay afraid. It is the only thing that will keep you human. We parted ways at the next junction. She went one direction toward the naval docks where her crusade fleet was assembling. I went another toward the military command centers where I would begin coordinating with the forces I now commanded. We did not say goodbye. There was no point. We would both be changed so much by our service that the people we were now would effectively die anyway. The Sister Celestine who led a crusade would not be the same woman who walked these corridors with me. The Lord Commander I would become would not remember being the captain who agonized over 50,000 deaths. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the Emperor judged us not for who we were, but for who we could become. For the tools we could be shaped into through service and suffering and impossible choices. We were not being rewarded. We were being refined, hammered into new forms by the weight of responsibility. The transport that carried me away from Terra left 3 days later. I stood at a viewport and watched the planet recede, watched the palace shrink until it was just another structure in the endless cityscape that covered the world. Somewhere down there, the Emperor sat on his throne, dying and living and watching over 1,000,000 worlds through eyes that barely qualified as human anymore. Somewhere down there, new petitioners were being summoned to face judgment. New souls were being measured and refined and shaped into tools for humanity's survival. The cycle would continue long after I was dust, would continue until the throne finally failed or humanity finally fell or something changed in ways too fundamental to predict. I was just one more soul added to that cycle, one more burden carrier, one more person who would sacrifice and suffer and die in service of a species that would never know my name. I thought about the 50,000 men I had abandoned at the Forge World, wondered if they would understand what I had become, wondered if they would approve or condemn. Decided it did not matter. They were dead and I was alive, and I had work to do that would require me to make choices just as terrible. I would carry their memory with me, would add it to all the other memories I would accumulate in the years ahead, would let their ghosts haunt me as motivation to make every death count for something. The ship entered the warp and Terra disappeared behind us. Ahead lay Segmentum Tempestus, hundreds of worlds, billions of people, wars that had been grinding on for decades, enemies that wanted nothing more than humanity's extinction. And at the center of it all, making the decisions that determined who lived and who died, would be me. Lord Commander Marcus Thane, a man who had been measured by the Emperor and found sufficient to bear unbearable weight. I remembered the weight of that parchment in my hand when the custodian first delivered my summons. I had not known then that it was not a summons to face judgment. It was a test to see if I could become judgment itself. The copper taste of fear, the desperate hope that this was all some mistake. It had not been a mistake. It had been a test, and I had passed not by being strong or righteous or brave, but by being capable of carrying guilt without being destroyed by it. That capability was all the Emperor needed, all that anyone could offer in a galaxy where every choice led to horror, and the only real question was which horror served the greater purpose. I would carry that burden for however long I remained able, would make the impossible choices when they came, would sacrifice what needed sacrificing, would become something less than human in service of keeping humanity alive. And when death finally claimed me, when the weight became too much and I joined the billions who had died in the Emperor's service, he would remember my name, would remember the choices I made and the burden I carried. That memory was the only reward I would receive, the only comfort available. It would have to be enough. It was all there was. The Emperor protects, not by preventing suffering, but by ensuring that suffering serves a purpose. I understood that now. Understood it in ways I had not before standing in his presence. The protection was not gentle, it was not kind, but it was real, and it was all that stood between humanity and extinction. I turned away from the viewport and walked toward the command deck where my new staff waited. Walked toward the future I had seen in visions. Walked toward choices that would define me and damn me and ultimately consume me. But I walked with purpose, with understanding, with the grim acceptance that comes from being judged by a dying God and found capable of becoming something terrible in service of something greater. The wheel had turned, the judgment was complete. The burden was mine to carry, and I would carry it until it killed me, or I became something that no longer remembered why the weight mattered in the first place,